Hi everyone, thank you for that, Alice. Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge my co-authors. This was a highly collaborative project, so there is Fred Beil and Simon Goldsworthy, Bert Sardi, Simon Childerhouse, Dave Donnelly from Blue Planet Marine, Rob Harcourt from Macquarie University, and Guido Carr from Flinders University. So just a bit of background, southern right whales are listed as endangered under the EPBC Act and vulnerable under the National Parks and Wildlife Act. They have a southern hemisphere distribution between about 16 degrees south and 65 degrees. And they were considered the right whale by whalers because they were slow moving, they floated when they were dead, and certainly at certain times of the year they were close to coastal areas. However, as I said, heavily exploited, with about 150,000 individuals estimated to be taken in the southern hemisphere between 1790 and 1980. And this figure here is actually a reconstructed chart made by Townsend in 1935, which is based on the locations from just North American pelagic whaling ships of where they captured whales, southern right whales, throughout the southern hemisphere. The warmer colours indicate those animals that were taken during the austral summer months. And a proportion of southern right whales will, every year, will migrate between generally offshore summer feeding grounds to coastal wintering and calving grounds. So within Australia, southern right whales are distributed from southwest Western Australia all the way around to New South Wales, including Tasmania. And it's been proposed that southern right whales should be managed according to two populations, which are a southeastern population and a southwest population. This is based on differences in recovery rates for the two populations that have been observed, differences in population size, and some genetic evidence to suggest the southeast population may actually be demographically independent. The line here, the delineation, is completely unclear. So what we know of the southeast population, there's not that much data. An aerial survey that was conducted from Ceduna in South Australia around to New South Wales in 2013, including Tasmania, estimated about 189 to 201 individuals for that southeast population. The southwest population has been studied for considerably longer, since 1977 the Western Australia Museum has been conducting aerial surveys led by John Bannister. So initially they covered mostly the coastal waters of Western Australia. Since 1993 they've gone into South Australia and they conduct aerial surveys as far as Ceduna. And within South Australia, the Head of Bight, as I'm sure everyone is aware, is a very significant winter calving and aggregation area for this species, and it is one of the key features of the Great Australian Bight Marine Park, which is now the Far West Coast Marine Park as well. And the population that winters and calves at Head of Bight has been extensively studied. Steve Bernal set up a long-term cliff-based photo ID study in 1991 that continues to this day, and since 1993, as I said, aerial surveys have also gone through the area from the Western Australian Museum, and then Dooner has also done a number of monitoring projects of the population. So they're incredibly well studied. And what we know from these studies and from other studies across the range of southern right whales is that females calve every 3 years in general. This interval can fluctuate. It seems to be linked to large-scale climate variability, but in theory you should expect that a reproductive female will turn up every 3 years, and they've been shown to have very strong fidelity to their calving grounds. However, there has been a couple of individuals that have been seen at calving grounds in Australia, and then in another breeding season they've calved calving grounds in the New Zealand Auckland Islands. We also know from photo ID data that there are coastal movements of the southwestern population during the winter calving aggregation period. But what we really don't know is, well, there's limited information about the feeding grounds, and we particularly don't know much about the movement from and to coastal areas between these higher latitude feeding grounds. As a result, two of the high priority actions that were identified by the Conservation Management Plan for this species is understanding offshore distribution and migration and characterising behaviour and movements. So the objectives of this project were to collect baseline satellite telemetry data for the offshore migratory routes of adult southern right whales from head of bite breeding aggregation, and to monitor the short, medium and long-term effects of the tags on the whales. And this project was funded by the Australian Marine Mammal Centre. It has a load of collaborators involved who also provided in-kind support. It was conducted with PIRSA animal ethics approval and with the relevant state and Commonwealth research permits. We conducted the tagging at head of bite between 6th and 8th of September 2014. We did some additional work on the 9th. And we use satellite transmitters that are embedded in an implantable stainless steel housing that's been designed by the Australian Antarctic Division. And to ensure that we had as long of a battery life as possible, we had them on a 3 hours on, 3 hours off duty cycle. And tags were deployed from a 5.5 metre inflatable vessel, and that was following AAD strict protocols, and we had the vessel launched from SARDI's research vessel Mackay. And we concurrently tried to take biopsied samples of the tagged whales if possible. And then this is just an illustration of the tag itself. So this is the housings, 320 millimetres long. There's a spring-loaded anchor here and then passively deployed petals. And when the tag's deployed and immersed, there's a saltwater switch that will then start the tag transmitting to the Argos satellite network and providing locations of the tag. So we successfully tagged 9 southern right whales and got 6 concurrent biopsies. And these tags were deployed on 8 adult females accompanied by a calf and 1 unaccompanied adult. The tagging approach lasted 4 to 6 minutes on average. So an approach was when we got within 10 metres of a whale. Not all approaches would end in tagging and not all approaches would end in biopsying. For the actual 9 animals that we tagged, you can see that approaches last from 1 to 6 minutes. On the moment that the tag was deployed, we graded the reaction of the animal to deployment, and this is based on the AAD scale. So 3 would be an extreme reaction, such as tail slapping, and 1 would be seen as a negligible reaction. So no change observed. And what we had was 3 of the animals showed extreme reactions, 4 of the animals showed a more mild reaction, and 2 of the animals were seen to have a negligible reaction. And we managed to get 6 photo IDs as well, so 6 of the tagged whales we were able to get photo IDs for. So for anyone who doesn't know, I'm sure you're aware, but we're able to individually identify southern right whales due to these patterns of callosities on their heads. So our initial aim was that we'd be able to do focal follows of tagged animals and follow them for like up to an hour after the tag was deployed. When we got up to head of bite, it's a very open area in terms of weather, and we had really bad weather, so unfortunately we weren't able to do that. We had to do everything within 2 days. So our post tagging behavioural response or assessment of the immediate tagging response, we are able to do just from information from the tags themselves and then from photo ID resites. So unfortunately 3 of the tags, 9 tags failed to transmit at all. Of the 6 tags that did transmit, what we saw was that all of those whales remained within 2.8 kilometres of the location where they were tagged for the next 12 hours subsequent to tagging. However, you can see there was a big range here, and the asterisks indicate that these tags ceased transmitting, and we had a really high failure rate with tag transmissions, which was very disappointing. Of the 6 individuals that we had photo IDs for, we did a dedicated aerial survey with Dooner 18 days after we'd finished tagging, so we did a dedicated aerial survey of the area, and we recited 4 of these individuals. The arrow indicating that, and that's tags on the dorsal side of the animals. The Clifftop study, the Great Australian Right Whale study, also recited those 4 whales during a period up to 22 days after tagging. The reason for the high tag failure rate that we had, it could be that it was tag malfunction. It may also have been that there was poor implantation. But what we did manage to get is the first 3 tracks showing the offshore movement of southern right whales from mainland Australia. And so these are the filtered Argos locations of the individuals. As you can see, this blue individual here, there's a blue dot up there at head of bite. We then had 26 days without transmission, at which point the animal was 1,300 kilometres west, just off Albany. And then for both the red and the green individuals, we're able to calculate how long they stayed in the aggregation before leaving on their southward migration. So this individual stayed 24 days post-tagging, and this individual stayed 28 days post-tagging. So these indicate that there wasn't an immediate response by at least these individuals to the tagging itself. 2 minutes? Oh. Right, let's get that one. So one of the things we did with the tracks was that we looked at whether or not there was associations with environmental variables, and we did this by superimposing the tracks over dynamic oceanographic information that was summarised over 3 weeks prior to the end of tagging. So with this individual, you can see there's a directed southerly movement until it hits around the 41 degrees south area and a temperature band of about 11.5 degrees, and this is characteristic of the southern tropical front, which is known to be an area of importance for marine predators foraging in the Southern Ocean. The individual that was off Western Australia, we found association with low level sea height and high current flow, and this is indicative of low pressure eddy systems, which are areas that result in localised upwelling, and this is actually anticyclonic system, so you can see that the whale is tracking around it, going into the flow of the current. So these data from these tracks, combined with historical tracks, or historical whaling data and tracks from individuals from the Auckland Islands in New Zealand, indicate 3 likely foraging grounds for right whales that winter in Australia and New Zealand, being southwestern Australia, subtropical front, and also Antarctic waters. One of the other things we did was look at what the tracks could tell us about potential overlap with risk for these animals in during their migratory movements. So we looked at time spent within current petroleum exploration permit areas, so the Great Australian Bight and the Central Bight. This individual spent 1.8 days going through a potential lease area, and this one took 2.4 days to go through the lease area. In Western Australia, the individual also spent 1.69 days in this exploratory lease area. Obviously, this is when the tag started transmitting again, so we can't speculate on whether it was there longer than that. So this sort of data is highly important in actually thinking about the overlap and assessing and mitigating potential risks for these species when they're away from coastal areas. Potential risks that have been identified in the conservation management plan for the southwest population include shipping noise and vessel strikes, seismic surveys, entanglement, and boat-based whale watching. Obviously, this is an invasive procedure. It's not like gluing a tag to a seal that's going to molt off. We can't catch these animals. If we use something that was non-invasive, the tags would stay on for a matter of hours or maybe days. So actually getting this long-term movement data, which is critical for management, does mean that there is a trade-off with having to use an invasive technique. So we have to be mindful of that, and we have to be mindful of whether or not that has long-term effects on these animals. So the tagged females during the study, we'd expect them to return to breeding grounds in 2017 or 2018. What we do know from South Africa is that 11-year period post the deployment of satellite tags there, and they had a different type of satellite tag. It was a much bigger body, and they found no difference in the calving rates of females that were tagged or not tagged during that period. So the 6 animals that we have photo ID for, those photo IDs will be available in the Australasian right whale photo identification catalogue, which will mean that we'll be able to have longer term monitoring of them across the range. And again, this really was multi-collaborative project. So just to acknowledge again, funders in kind support, the Marine Mammal Centre for providing equipment and advice, DUNER and the Far West Coast Marine Park for providing safety equipment and also obviously doing the aerial survey with us. Skipper and crew of the research boat, Persa Fisheries, who provided the inflatable rig that we used, Emma Carroll from the University of St Andrews. All the biopsy samples we took are going into a global study looking at genetics of southern right whales across their range. And then the Great Australian Right Whale Study for providing information on resites of the tiger whales. Thank you.
We might have time for one quick